In our last lesson, we talked about how socialism as a philosophy entered Russia in the wake of the 20th century. Because this was a time when the workers, when the peasants were filled with resentment and anger and rebellion against the factory owners, against the land owners. They wanted to topple the rule of the Tsar. And this was also a time when nationalistic sentiments were spreading in not just Russia but throughout Europe. The revolutionaries in many regions throughout Europe had by this time overthrown the erstwhile oppressive monarchies and kingdoms. But you'll be surprised to know that till the early years of the 20th century, the Tsars were not subject to any parliament. So can you imagine the immense power that the Tsars held in Imperial Russia? They were the final say in Imperial Russia. Nothing could refute their rule. And if anything went against their opinion, if anything went against their ideas of how the state should be ruled, then inevitably those voices were suppressed and completely crushed. The spread of anti-monarchical sentiments among the masses facilitated the coming together of the social democrats, the socialist revolutionaries, the liberals, the nationalists. All of them now started mobilizing and joining hands, and they had just one aim to look forward to. They were wanting to end the oppressive state of affairs in Russia because the monarchical rule was autocratic in nature. There was nothing beyond the Tsar's say. In fact, the Tsar was also not subject to any parliament. And this implies that the masses did not really have any say in the political affairs of the country. At the same time, all political parties were also banned and deemed illegal. So, the masses did not really have any medium to voice their opinions. The only thing that they were looking forward to do at this point was overthrowing the Tsar's rule. In the lesson that introduced us to the social, religious, political system in Imperial Russia, we learned that the state religion in Imperial Russia was Russian Orthodox Christianity. At the same time, several sections of the society also belonged to other religious faiths. There were the Muslims as well. In Muslim-dominated regions of the Russian Empire, the Jadidists, who were the Muslim scholars, wanted reform by establishing the rule of modernized Islam. So various sections of the society were trying in their own ways to end the Tsar's rule, to overthrow the monarchical rule and bring in place a new social order, a new dawn for the masses. Another international event that happened at this point of time costed Russia its prestige in the eyes of the world. And it also led to a lot of confusion and turbulence among the Russian masses. And this political event that we are talking about was the Russo-Japanese War that took place between 1904 and 1905. Now this Russo-Japanese War was fought between Imperial Russia on the one hand and the Japanese Empire on the other hand over rival imperial ambitions in Manchuria and the Korean Empire. Now Manchuria is a landlocked country that lies between China and Russia, and here you could locate both Manchuria as well as Korea. Now here was the Russian Empire and here was the Japanese Empire. And the Japanese Empire as well as the Russian Empire both wanted to make their power, their influence felt in this eastern part of the world. And so they had rival imperial ambitions. That is to say, both the Russian Empire and the Japanese Empire wanted to gain control over Korea and Manchuria. And this led to the Russo-Japanese War that was waged between 1904 and 1905. Now let us briefly talk about the Russo-Japanese War. The Russian Empire was always riddled by its imperialist ambitions since the times of Ivan the Terrible, who was the first Tsar in Russia. And since the 16th century, that is, since the times of Ivan the Terrible, Russia was wanting to expand its power in the eastern part of the globe. And so, when this Russo-Japanese War was being fought between 1904 and 1905, the then Tsar Nicholas II believed that this military engagement would bring victory to the Russian Empire if the war got prolonged. So this prolonged warfare in Manchuria and Korea would bring victory to the Russian Empire, as Tsar Nicholas II believed. And so he kept on prolonging the war. But Russia was not being able to mount momentous victories over the Japanese Empire. In fact, in the earlier months of the war, it was the Russian Empire that was not agreeing to the idea of an armistice. But over the months of the war, the Russian Empire was now in the position of a crushing defeat. But Tsar Nicholas II still went on to believing that this war would end in Russian victory. And it did not, because the war ended in a crushing defeat and absolute humiliation for the Russian Empire. So much so that it costed the empire its international prestige. The world was taken aback when the Japanese Empire managed to defeat the Russian Empire. And with this, Russia also lost its power and influence in the eastern part. It was the Japanese Empire that now became a very important power in this region. And so the Russian Empire lost its international prestige. At the same time, this also added to domestic unrest, because the masses were not supporting this idea of Tsar Nicholas II. The masses were the ones who were suffering. A lot of Russian men also lost their lives in the war. And it is for this reason that prices of different commodities were also increasing in the empire. So the masses were not in favor of this Russo-Japanese War that Tsar Nicholas II wanted to prolong. So this one war and defeat in the same costed Russia its international prestige, as well as added to and further accentuated domestic turbulence within the empire. Now this was a time when the prices of different commodities in the Russian Empire kept on surging to an abnormal extent. And increase in prices and decrease in wages now triggered the formation of workers' associations in 1904. The wages of the workers got decreased by a whole 20%. So can you understand how difficult it became for these workers who were already not well paid, who were already overworked? And so the formation of these workers' associations was now actually paving the way for a revolution to take place. The Assembly of Russian Factory and Mill Workers was formed in the year 1904, and it was formed under the leadership of the Russian Orthodox priest Father Georgy Gapon. This image here shows you Father Georgy Gapon in a robe, and it was under his leadership that the Assembly of Russian Factory and Mill Workers was formed in the year 1904 when the Russo-Japanese War had broken out. Dismissal of 4 workers of this organization at the Putilov Iron Works put the final nail in the coffin, because the workers were now agitating in large numbers. Huge workers' strikes broke out in St. Petersburg as well as other parts of the empire. So much so that around 110,000 workers mobilized and they now started marching in St. Petersburg. And so this dismissal of 4 workers at the Putilov Iron Works could be considered the final nail in the coffin, the final trigger that led to the Russian Revolution of 1905. So this was a time when the fire against the monarchical rule was already burning high. And all this dismissal of 4 workers led to was adding fuel to this fire. But any monarchical rule always remains ready in its attempt to suppress any kind of dissent or contrasting opinions. And likewise, when the workers were striking, when they were mobilizing in St. Petersburg as well as other parts of the Russian Empire, now took place one of the most horrible events that has gone down in history. And under the leadership of Father Georgy Gapon, these workers now mobilized and they were marching towards the winter palace of the Russian Emperor. So the Tsar lived in the winter palace which was situated in St. Petersburg. And when these people were marching towards the winter palace on January 22, 1905, only to send a petition in order to make the lives and the working conditions of the workers better, the Imperial army now opened fire on them. Almost all these workers lost their lives. All they wanted to do was send a petition to the Tsar, but they were killed in the process. They were trampled by the Imperial army. They were shot at gunpoint. And this event then came to be known as the Bloody Sunday. And it was this Bloody Sunday that can be considered as the beginning of the Russian Revolution of 1905. Following the Bloody Sunday, now broke out the 1905 Russian Revolution. Massive strikes took place in several parts of the empire because of the events that happened outside the Winter Palace at St. Petersburg. Because so many workers lost their lives only when they wanted to petition to the Tsar. This is how ruthless, how merciless most autocratic regimes were. And so, workers as well as the Russian masses now started storming the industrial centers, and these kinds of strikes and protests now eventually spread to the rest of the empire. University students also staged walkouts, which is why universities were closed down, and a series of protests against the Tsar now followed. So this is how the Russian Revolution of 1905 had broken out. Now till this time, the liberal bourgeoisie, the intellectuals, were not really associated with the workers. But after the Bloody Sunday and after the 1905 Russian Revolution broke out, even the liberal bourgeoisie, that included the doctors, lawyers, writers, engineers as well as other professionals, now formed the Union of Unions in 1905. And together all of these people demanded the formation of a constituent assembly. And with this, for the first time, a link between the workers and peasants and laborers on the one hand and the intellectuals on the other hand was established. Now this 1905 Russian Revolution wasn't really successful in overthrowing the Russian Tsar's rule, because the Tsar managed to suppress this revolution. But it was a revolution nonetheless, and it acted as a prelude to the 1917 Russian Revolution that we will be discussing subsequently through the course of our lessons. And rightly pointed out by Vladimir Lenin, this 1905 Russian Revolution was the great dress rehearsal before the final Russian Revolution of 1917, in which the Tsar's rule was overthrown. Now, because of these huge strikes, massive demonstrations that were breaking out in several parts of the Russian Empire, the then Tsar Nicholas II realized that he had to do something in order to arrive at a middle ground, in order to pacify the revolutionaries. And by adopting a conciliatory approach, Tsar Nicholas II now allowed the creation of an elected consultative parliament that was called the Duma. Now, this elected consultative parliament was not a really autonomous body. The Imperial State Duma was the first Duma to be introduced to the Russian Empire in 1906. We just mentioned that the Duma was not an autonomous body, and this is because the Tsar had an absolute veto to dismiss the Duma whenever he wanted. So this Duma was not an independent autonomous parliament that we see in modern liberal democracies, but it was an elected consultative parliament nevertheless. Before proceeding with this lesson, let me ask you a question. When was the first Duma introduced to the Russian Empire? Was it introduced in 1909, 1910, 1905 or in 1906? Well, the correct answer is 1906. The Imperial State Duma was the first Duma to be introduced to the Russian Empire in the year 1906. We know that Imperial Russia was an absolute monarchy, and Tsar Nicholas II was an absolute monarch. He did not want any dissenting voice, any contrasting opinion. And so, we also saw how the Bloody Sunday entailed the horrible crushing of dissenting voices that came from the factory workers. Now, to suppress dissenting voices, Tsar Nicholas II declared most workers' associations illegal after 1905. In fact, he did not want any protest, any demonstration in Imperial Russia. And he also frequently dismissed the Duma. We know that the Duma was not independent of the Tsar's power. The Duma was very much subject to the Tsar's power, and it was not the other way round. So let us briefly talk about the history of the Imperial Russian Duma. The first Duma was formed on 27th April 1906, and it lasted for only 73 days until July 8, 1906. Now, this Duma was wanting to bring about reforms for the people, mostly land reforms. But Tsar Nicholas II, on the other hand, wanted to suppress the workings of the Duma so that it did not gain huge representation, it did not gain huge popularity among the masses. Now, the second Duma lasted for only 103 days. It was formed on 20th February 1907 and it functioned till 3rd June 1907. So this was also another short-living Duma. But you will be surprised to know that the third Duma lasted for a full 5-year term. Why do you think it was so? This is because the members of the third Duma were selected by Tsar Nicholas II, and these members were very carefully selected. The members of the third Duma included the gentry, landowners, businessmen, conservative politicians. From this, we can understand that the liberals, the revolutionaries, the Russian masses did not really have any say in this political affair, which is why the third Duma served from 1st November 1907 till July 1912. It is for this reason that it lasted for 5 whole years. With this, we come to an end of our discussion on the Russian Revolution of 1905. We learned that the Russian Revolution of 1905 broke out when the masses, the liberals, the nationalists, the socialist revolutionaries, the social democrats had joined hands to overthrow the Tsar. Now, Russian Empire's involvement in the Russo-Japanese War between 1904 and 1905 also costed the empire its national prestige. It also accentuated turbulence in domestic affairs. And finally, the dismissal of 4 workers at the Putilov Iron Works had put the final nail in the coffin. Following this, many workers under the leadership of Father Georgy Gapon had marched towards the Winter Palace, which was the official residence of Tsar Nicholas II. And it was there that these people were killed. So many people were massacred, which triggered the 1905 Russian Revolution. Strikes and demonstrations broke out throughout the empire. And so Tsar Nicholas II realized that he had to take action in order to achieve a middle ground. And that he did by now allowing the formation of an elected consultative parliament, which was called the Duma. But this Duma was not independent either. The first Duma was formed in 1906 and the first and the second Dumas served for a very short period of times. And then the third Duma lasted for 5 long years because this was constituted by conservative people, by those people who were in support of the Tsar. Having talked about the Russian Revolution of 1905 in this lesson, in our subsequent lesson, we will focus on how turbulence and political turmoils kept on happening throughout the Russian Empire and how it all led the stage for the final Russian Revolution of 1917. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.